We are super excited to have you with us this morning. I want to let you know what's coming up. Next week, we'll be kicking off our spring series. Maybe you're thinking, spring, it's winter. Well, hey, the groundhog didn't see his shadow, so it's supposed to come actually 6 weeks early. So we're going to go ahead and believe in faith that's going to happen, and we're doing a study on the book of Ecclesiastes. It is an Old Testament book, and we're calling the series The Question That the Book Answers. And we're calling the series, What is Life? And the book of Ecclesiastes is incredible because it, time and again, answers this question, what is life? It's a picture of a guy who really had everything, pursued everything, and essentially comes to the conclusion that there's got to be something more. And so we're very excited to dive into that book. I promise that you're going to really enjoy the series. And one of the things that we're going to do, because we're going to be studying a book, is we're going to try this kind of a campaign that we're calling Bibles for Bagels, or Bagels for Bibles, something like that. And so if you bring a physical, like hard copy book of the book Bible, like one of these, okay, what we'll do is all you got to do is show it in our cafe, and what they'll do is they will give you a free bagel, and if you're more healthy, they'll give you a donut. It just is our way of saying, thanks for bringing the Bible, because what we find is that if you have one of those with you, it's actually a little bit easier to pay attention. And so you bring one in, we'll do that. If you show them your phone, they're going to say, cool phone, but not give you a bagel. So just so you know, that's going to happen. We've already told them about that. But it should be a fun thing to do in this series as we study the book together. But we are in the last week of our series that we used to kick off the year that we've called Good Start, Good Heart. And let's just be honest that the title is a little misleading because every week we've talked about how wicked our hearts are. But the thought behind the series is that though our heart has problems, though it has deep-rooted issues, if we see that and we deal with some of those emotions as they come in, that we can actually have a heart that's been transformed by God. And we've looked at all kinds of just different issues in this series. A couple weeks ago, we talked about guilt. Some people carry guilt, and what happens is they carry guilt, it comes out. And because our hearts are wicked, we don't always know how to process it the right way. We talked about jealousy, and I think we all probably hate to admit that we've got that in us, but we all probably have it in us at least a little bit, and so we talked about how that hits our heart and comes out. And then last week, as Pastor Keith mentioned, we talked about greed and how that hits our hearts and comes out. And I can tell you that from this series, that what I've enjoyed about it is it's forced me to look at myself honestly. And it's forced me to look at things and maybe see things inside of me that I hate to admit are there. No one likes to admit that they're jealous. No one likes to admit that they don't think they have enough, but the beauty of seeing that we are the issue is that we can find our solutions in Christ. And so that's what we're going to look at. And just in case maybe you're new and you're like, why do you say that the heart is wicked? Why do you think that these issues are there? Well, this is a verse that we've been quoting every single week, but I think it's good because maybe we'll memorize it. And this is Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9, where he says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? This heart, this thing inside of us. And this morning what we're going to do is we're going to look at an issue that comes out of our hearts, and that's anger. And if you think of all of the issues that we've already talked about, I mean, couldn't you argue that anger is a byproduct of them? You feel a little guilty, so you respond in anger. You're jealous because someone has something that you think should be yours, so you respond in anger. You're greedy, you want more of something and you can't get it, and so you respond in anger. And here's the thing with anger, that anger is one of those things that some of us have that we're not even aware of. That maybe some of us are unaware of how our anger actually affects those closest to us. Made me think of a situation that happened several years ago. And I have a friend, and I'll just say, like, he's an angry person, okay? Like, he's just, you know him, like, you know people like that. Like, they're just, Like they're going to die with a frown. Like he's that guy. Okay? And we're hanging out at my friend's house, and he's got a lake house, and there's about 12 of us just hanging out on his deck, and he asks one of us to cook some burgers. Okay? And so one of my friends hops up because he considers himself a grill master, and he hops up and starts cooking these burgers. And my friend, who is angry, starts freaking out on him for cooking the burgers the wrong way. Okay? And if you've ever been in a situation where someone has an angry outburst, the moment after that outburst is particularly awkward, isn't it? Like, so he freaks out, raises his voice about hamburgers, and we're all just kind of sitting there on the deck like, what do we do now? Like, do we go home? Like, who's going to be the first person to talk? And let me let you know something about me. Okay, so I'm a little jovial, and I like to poke the bear. So I'm sitting there, and I got the personality you can get away with it sometimes. And so I'm sitting up there, and he just yelled at a guy for burgers, and I look at my friend, and I say, Ken, why are you always so mad at people? And Ken's like, what are you talking about? I never get angry. And so, again, like I like to poke the bear, and so I'm like, really? You never get angry? And I look at the group of people, there's about 12 of us there, and I say, would you just raise your hand if Ken has ever yelled at you before? And every single hand on the deck went up, and I said, I rest my case. Now, here's the deal. He was probably more aware of his anger than he let on. But the truth is that there's something about anger that we're like, we don't always see it. Because most of us, when we get angry, we actually have a good reason behind why we're angry. And all we're thinking about is the reason, but maybe we're not paying attention to what we're doing. And some of us here, we talk about anger, we think about anger, and we think, oh, well, I mean, is it really that big of a deal? Okay, so I have a few outbursts from time to time. Truthfully, no one really sees it except for a few people. Like, is it really that big of a deal? And to that, I would say, absolutely it is. Look at what Jesus says about anger here in Matthew chapter 5. And this is Jesus speaking about anger. He said, you've heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the fire of hell. Now that's heavy. Like, you have Jesus here compare anger to murder, which is something to think about. I don't think anyone's going to say murder's okay. And to the person who would say, well, no one knows. I'm able to get away with it. It doesn't really matter. To that, I would say, well, Jesus actually says, essentially, don't think you're going to get away with it. That I will find out. I do see it. And that there is a response that comes. And so our responses, we talk about things like anger, especially since Jesus uses the hell word, shouldn't be, oh, well, that's not me. But really, our response to this type of a topic should be, God, is this in me? God, is this something that I struggle with? Is this something that I need to see? And I want to look at something the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus as our text this morning, and it gives us a really appropriate way to respond to anger. And this is in Ephesians chapter 4, and look at what he says here. He says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. And skipping ahead, he says this in verse 31. He says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Now, it's important as we talk about anger to give the caveat that most of you who grew up in church are probably thinking at this point, and it's that, well, it's not a sin to be angry. And here you have Paul, he says, and we agree, like it's not a sin to be angry. That's why Paul says, be angry and do not sin. He doesn't say, don't be angry. Because oftentimes there are going to be situations that will come in your life where anger might be a necessary emotion to what you're experiencing. Maybe someone hurts someone that you love. Like, it makes sense to respond to that in anger. It makes sense to be angry about that. Maybe you look at the world and you think, man, it just feels like it's moving further and further away from Christ, and there's something inside of you that feels angry about that. Like, that is a justifiable response. Maybe you see someone and they're getting taken advantage of, and as you see that, you feel angry. That makes sense there too. Or maybe even just in the plainest sense, you see someone do something wrong, and you're angry about that. And to say, yep, you're right. It is not a sin to be angry. But even if you look at this text, you think about anger, it certainly can get very dangerous very quickly. And if you just let anger go, it can be damaging to you and to those around you. And it can bring you to places, and it can make it so that no one wants to be near you because you haven't figured out how to handle this emotion. And as you sit here and you think, well, yeah, but Ryan, like, anger's not all, it doesn't say that it's a sin. Well, okay, yeah. And you might even think, well, yeah, well Ryan, didn't Jesus overturn tables in the temple because he was angry? Yeah, he did. Even if you look at the end of Matthew's gospel, you could argue that he gives the religious leaders there a what for. And I don't know that his tone is exactly nice. But if you look at all of Jesus, he also fed people. He also healed people. He also taught people how to forgive. And if you look at all of Jesus' life, I don't know very many people that are going to look at it and say, yeah, he was an angry person. And even as we talk about anger, hear me. Like, he was Jesus. Like, so when he would do something, we know it was the right way to respond because he was Jesus. My fear is that as I say that hey, it's not always a sin to be angry, and you're like, well, Jesus, yeah, Jesus was. He was always right, but don't take that same level of confidence to your anger. And if we look at this text, okay, yes, it says, be angry and do not sin. But Andrew Lincoln, in his commentary, what he points out about this is that if you look at what Paul is saying, he's not talking about the benefits of righteous anger. He doesn't, like, there's no force behind this that would encourage you to stew in anger. The force behind this is, let me show you how anger can be a really bad thing. Let me show you how anger can ruin things for you. So it brings us to this place. Okay, so then what do? We all feel it. How do we respond when we feel it? I want to give you 3 things we'll see in this text that we should do when we feel anger. And the first thing is this. Contrary to what the Cranberries would say, you don't let it linger. That was for the millennials. Everyone else like, what? A cranberry? Cranberries don't talk. It's a song. Just look it up. It's average. So don't let your anger linger. Have him put the verse up. He says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. So something happens, okay? And you feel anger. Maybe someone cut you off on the road, you tell them they're number one, like you're angry. Maybe someone said something and it hurt your feelings and you're angry. Maybe something from your past keeps coming back up in your mind and you find that you're getting angry, or I'll just say this out here, maybe it's just your spouse. But for whatever reason, something happens and you are angry. What do? Well, you got to figure out a way to move on. You've got to figure out a way to not stay there. I mean, think about anger. How often something that's like natural and this feeling that makes perfect sense, how often, because we just continue to stew and let it fester, does it get way stronger than it ever should be? That's why Paul says, don't let the sun go down. The idea is that a sunset would represent a day, that you get certain things done in a sunset. And he's saying, hey, before the sun sets, figure out how to move on. Figure out how to not let that thing control you. And let's just all admit right here that is much easier said than done. Because there's something about anger. Feels good, right? Like there's something about coming back to these situations that just feels like right. And I had this epiphany recently where I found that when I had nothing else to think about, I would think about things that make me angry. And I kind of imagined like I would just swing on a tree, like on a branch, from like one thing that made me discontent to the next. And it was like I was going in a circle, and like I think I would move on from something, and I just kind of found myself back doing this loop of thinking about things that happened in the past that made me mad. And there came a point in my life where I was like, okay, seriously, like, is this how I want to live? Do I want to let things that happened in the past continue to control what is happening today? Do I want to continue to have conversations with people in my mind that I don't even see or talk to anymore and let them control how I handle my day? And there comes a point where after a period of time, you look at your anger and you're like, man, I've been thinking about that for that long? It's just sad. But we keep coming back, and here's what it reveals. It reveals something about our hearts. Like, I'll tell you this, and this is just marketing working. I remember the first time I saw a LaCroix can. And I was somewhere, and I was like, man, that is a pretty can. I bet the beverage tastes really good. I opened it up, I drank it, I set it down, never touched it again. Like, I've had hairspray once. I don't need to have it twice. Now, I said, like, now, if I said that, but then I keep bringing up a LaCroix can, and I'm always, like, it says something. I actually really like LaCroix, and here's the thing with anger. We like it. We like the feeling that comes with our anger, especially when we can just keep it internal. Because it gives us this sense of control. It gives us this ability to say all the things that we wish we could have said, but we didn't have the courage to say in the moment. And then instead of moving on, here's what the crazy thing is what I've found is that I actually can become more passionate about a thing several years removed from it happening than I was when the event happened, and it's because I let the sun go down on my anger. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is this what we want to do? And so maybe the question then is, okay, so if we decide, I'm not going to let the sun go down, then what do? How do you move on? And we'll get there at the end a little bit, but just a couple of things that we can do. First off is this, is that we've got to stop bringing it up. That if something happened to you and you're frustrated with it, you shouldn't keep talking to people about that thing that frustrates you. Like there comes a point where you've just got to discipline to say, I'm going to stop talking about this thing. And then we've got to figure out something to do in our minds when we think about it. And I'll give you a suggestion at the end. So we stop feeding that thought that kind of consumes us. And then the other way that we move on is that we've got to learn to start giving people the benefit of the doubt. Because here's what I would guess. I would guess those people that have done things that have frustrated you, I bet they've done things to you that frustrate you that you have done to other people. Now, how would you want someone to respond if you'd want them to show you grace? You'd want them to give you the benefit of the doubt. We've got to take that same way of thinking to them. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they didn't mean it like you thought. Maybe all those things could be true, but we've got to learn to not let it linger. And the reason why is Paul makes this case, we see this in the second thought, is that we've got to realize that the devil is good at using our anger. Like we need to move on, because when the devil, the enemy, when he sees our anger, he sees an opportunity. God's goal for people, he wants unity. He wants unity in the church. He wants people to be together. Like he wants people together. And what the devil's goal would be is he wants disunity. And when he sees anger, he sees fertile soil to create disunity and to create problems. I mean, just think about it. How often do you do things you shouldn't when you're feeling peaceful? But when you're angry, what do you need? You need self-control. Look at this passage here where Paul's going to show us how the devil uses our anger. So he says, give no opportunity to the devil. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your anger. Give no opportunity to the devil. And then he gives some examples, and I'll just show you those in the bold. So he says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth. And then he says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander and all malice be put away from you. That there is this idea that this is how he uses it. So think of a situation maybe where someone did something to wrong you, where you were frustrated, you got angry. What'd you do? I would guess that depending on the offense, you probably had some corrupting talk come out of your mouth maybe. That maybe someone did something to you and they were friends with somebody, and so you're like, I'm going to make sure that they know what that person did to me. So you try to start corrupting relationships. Maybe where no one's involved, you're angry because something happened, and so what you do is you say, I'm going to say things about them that will color people's opinion about that person. And what is that? That is slander. And then I would guess, because you're here, there's probably something inside of you that says, I want to please God. I want to do what God wants me to do. I want to honor him with my life. So I would bet that you've probably come to a moment where you said, you know what, I want to move on from that. I want to forgive that person for what they did to me. I want to move on. But because you've done so much talking, it becomes very difficult to move on, doesn't it? Because once you think you moved on, those people that you talk to, they come and talk to you again, and all those feelings continue to get rehashed, and next thing you know, you're bitter. And bitterness is not just not how to live. I mean, think of the seasons in your life when you carry bitterness. I would guess that when you're carrying bitterness, you're probably a little more irritable, right? Probably short with people, right? If you're bitter, you're probably having a hard time focusing on the blessings that are happening around you because you're just bitter. And what's your bitterness? It's directed towards someone who is not experiencing the struggle that you are experiencing. I found this great quote on bitterness, and it's from Joanna Weaver. Listen to this. It says, bitterness is like drinking a poison and waiting for the other person to die. You just sit there frustrated. You just sit there mad. And here's the thing, that person that you're mad at, they're just living their life not feeling any of your wrath. And if you don't deal with it, it's just going to stay. Have Mark put up all those underlined words again, and I just want to make an observation about all those words. You're angry. None of that is going to solve it. Acting in any of those ways is not going to make it any better. It's not going to fix it. Chances are it's just going to make it worse. And it comes back to our heart because our heart goes to these things. And I would just say that this is what it reveals to our hearts. That maybe our hearts, if we're really honest, sometimes we don't actually want to make it better. We just want to be angry. We don't want to solve a problem. We just want more reasons to feel like we are in control. And when we do that, our enemy, the devil, just sees an incredible opportunity to strike. And if we're not careful, he will. So then we decide we're not going to let it linger. We realize that the devil can use it. And then finally what we do is we bring ourselves to a place of forgiveness. And forgiveness is so humongous. Jesus actually says that if you don't forgive people, he won't forgive you. And it's a huge topic, and I would just say maybe you've got all kinds of questions, maybe you've got a specific situation in your mind. We talked about it a lot last year, and so maybe you look at our series, it was like Words to Pray Every Day, and then we talked about it a lot in the story of Joseph. So like, if you have questions, I would really direct them to our podcast first. But I will say this, that if you're struggling with anger, especially towards a person, chances are it's because you've never forgave them. And when you look at what Paul says, he lists all those words that are challenging, and then he finishes the text with a really practical response to what we should do when we're angry. Look at this. I'll read them together because I think it's good to see together. He says, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice." I like that he just throws all malice. Like there might be some, no, all of it. Like you put it all there. And then what's the response? Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. When he talks about putting those things away from you, it's the idea. I don't know if you've ever walked into a spider web. Like when you do, what do? You just start ripping as hard as you can, trying to get that thing off of you. He's like, that's how you should respond to those things when you see them inside of you. But then you couple it with being tenderhearted, forgiving one another as Christ forgave you. And when they say as Christ forgave you, I mean, that's a high standard. That if there's anyone who would have been justified in harboring anger, it's him. He never did anything wrong. If there's anyone who would be justified in not forgiving, it would be him because he never did anything that would need that. But he's our example. He's what we look to when we look for a model for how we should forgive. And I found this in this book that we've been using. It's Enemies of the Heart by Andy Stanley, and he talks about how we can forgive. Because I would guess there's probably a lot of you probably like thinking of stuff, and you're thinking like, okay, well then how do I do this? And he gives really 4 like great, just practical ways to kind of walk yourself through forgiveness. And I want to walk you through them really quickly. The first one is this: is that you need to identify who you're angry with or what you're angry about. That feels like oversimplified because you're like, oh, I know who I'm angry with, but hear me. How often do we make people pay for our anger who aren't the cause of our anger? You have a rough day at work, you take it out on your kids. You're feeling stressed because your mom's sick, and you take it out on your spouse. So the first thing you need to do is you need to identify why you're mad. Who is it? Why? And then here's why that's good. Is so that in those moments where you misplace your anger, and you will, you'll see it. You'll see, I'm not mad at this person, I'm actually mad about this thing. And then it gives you the ability to confess in a way that's genuine. Where you can say to your kids, you can say to your spouse, hey, I'm really sorry I did that. I'm actually mad about this, and it has nothing to do with you. So you do that, and then what you need to do is you need to determine what they owe you. Determine what is owed to you. And this is good because what you'll discover as you determine that is you're probably going to discover that in most cases, they can't pay it back. So to hold on to something that can't be paid back is kind of silly. You might even determine that they could pay it back, but the thought of them paying it back to you actually feels pretty petty, and so you don't want to ask for it back. But here's why this is really good. It's really good because if you can't forgive someone specifically until you determine what they took away from you. Like, it's really easy to generally say, I forgive them. But if you can say, no, I forgive them because they took this away from me. I forgive them because when they did this, it made me feel this. And then you're able to forgive specifically, and you'll be able to forgive better. And then what you do after you determine this is you cancel the debt. Forgiveness, in essence, is just the canceling of debts. So you've determined who it is, you've determined what they owe, and then you say, the debt's canceled. I no longer expect them to repay to me what I feel like they owe me. Some people think, well, do I need to go tell them that? No, I probably wouldn't. But if they bring it up, then you say, no, I forgave you and I've canceled it. I don't expect you to do anything with that, and mean it. Now, wouldn't it be great if just like that, we do that, it's over? All those feelings. But if you're anything like me, you're going to find there are going to be things that are going to trigger. There are going to be things that are going to make you mad. There are things that are going to bring back up those feelings that you felt. And so that's why this last step is super important, and it's that you dismiss the case. So in those moments in your life where those thoughts keep coming back, you say to yourself, oh, I already dismissed the case. I already canceled that debt. I already determined that they don't owe me anymore. And it's going to keep coming back up, but if you train your mind to say, no, I forgive that. That debt's canceled. They don't owe me that anymore. Then you're going to find that you're going to be able to move on. And if you train your brain to do that, then you're going to really be able to forgive. And that's really the best way to respond when we feel anger in our hearts. But as I close this morning, I think that the truth is something about our heart that almost feels like unfairly wicked, right? Like you think of all of these issues like guilt, greed, jealousy, and anger. And I mean, even as we talk about them, the truth is, right, like it only takes a little bit for those emotions to come back up. And that as hard as we fight, some of you, you've probably been fighting some of this stuff for years. You've been walking with God for a long time, and you're like, I just thought that this would be over. I thought I would have this. And the hard thing about the heart is that it's not going to be healed until we're with Jesus forever in heaven. But here's the beauty of God, is that he does desire to help you today. That it's not just future tense. Yes, future is when it's going to all come together, but even today, God's desire isn't that you would wallow or be controlled by these emotions that can be so damaging, but that God's desire is to do something even better. Let me read this to you. This is from the book of Ezekiel, and this is God speaking through the prophet Ezekiel, talking about your heart. And it's something that we can hold on to as we deal. Look at this. God speaking, he says, I'll give you a new heart. And a new spirit I'll put within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules. That will only be so effective as we're willing to be connected to him. But he doesn't look at your heart and say, I'm just going to let it be a rock. But he says, why don't you come to me? Why don't you talk to me about it? And if you do, I'll take that heart that's broken and I will give you one that works. And not only that, but I'll put something inside of you that's going to make it easier for you to obey when you need. And so really, when we look at it as we finish this series, the question is, how close do we want to be to him? How much do we want him to help us? Or are we just going to continue to let our emotions control us? Let's pray.
Thank you for watching our services. If you have questions or you would like more information, you can visit us online at nlspringfield.com. We'd also love to have you join us at one of our Sunday morning services. We have programs at 9:30 and 11 for adults, students, and kids. We hope to see you there.